Well, I've started this project relatively recently, and it's a project that really was born out of student engagement with some of the found material that I brought to seminars for them to kind of discuss and to handle. The other important element of this is that it's quite kind of tactile, it's material as well as visual that I'm interested in. But amongst that, as well as kind of tickets and brochures and postcards, were a number of travel holiday albums. And really kind of they covered, the initial ones anyway, covered the period kind of from the mid 1920s to the 1960s. And students kind of were both a little bit thrown by this and fascinated by it. They originally thought that these were my relatives and that I was, showing them about kind of my family's experiences of holidaying. But when I told them, no, I had picked these up in charity shops and eBay and car boots, they were a bit taken aback that people had abandoned them. So it kind of came out of this notion of that there was this found material that was quite ephemeral. And once a family contact had been lost, this kind of stuff became obsolete because the memory connection with it, kind of disintegrated. So it really began with kind of students and some of the questions that they started to ask of this. And then really thinking about kind of preserving some of the albums in their form. So whilst I'm interested in individual holiday snaps and family pictures, there is something important to think about the albums in that
it's that classic, like, what would you save in a fire question, isn't it? Everyone always picks their photo albums.
Yeah. And not just that kind of, I think that there's something physical about them, the contact of them, the motion of leafing through them and what that does to us, both physically and emotionally, but also the way that we put them into an album or scrapbook. It is about our own self-narration of a holiday. And of course, it's leaving out all the difficulties, the lost passports, the negative stories around travel. So it's a very idealized version, but also thinking about, how that's told pictorially. And then some of the albums are great because they're really well annotated. So we can think about kind of who these people are, where they were visiting, and the order that they wanted to present their holiday experience in.
That's really interesting, because I suppose we often think about kind of self-curation as a kind of a symptom of a digital social media obsession, don't we? But actually, that's not the case. Photo albums do exactly the same thing.
Yes.
Do you see any other ties to social media or the way that we kind of present ourselves now?
I think there's definitely the element of filtering, although we're doing it in a slightly different way. Kind of self-presentation, lots of identity politics, are exactly the same. But also there's in kind of the world of travel photography in particular, there's the replication of the already known travel image, the iconic one of people standing with the Eiffel Tower in the background. We've all seen it. It's replicated over and over again in various media, and yet we still feel that we have to capture it. So whether that's in kind of the old analog versions or indeed digitally. So I think kind of there are lots of kind of continuities, even though how we store and connect some of those travel memories through image, is different.
It's really interesting, the idea that like memories and culture are not so kind of grounded in physical objects anymore. They're all kind of these digital kind of immaterial things, whereas like they kind of used to be so attached to physical objects.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you can kind of, so obviously these albums that you're looking at cover a period of quite a long time. If you've seen anything about the history of how we travel and how we go on holiday, and how has that changed over the period of time that you're looking at for these albums?
Well, I think probably my earliest album comes from about 1910. So the preservation of images is very different there. They're, single large plate images, and they're often devoid of people. And I think one of the things that's distinct from images today is that we often have either ourselves, the selfie, or kind of friends and family in there. But often some of these images are just of architecture, they're of landscape. So there's a different aesthetic, I think, to travel. Also, some of the modes of travel are different. So at the moment, I'm working on an article about ocean liner travel and how that's been recorded in albums, and thinking about some of the, I guess, conditions on board of some of the great ocean liners that had an impact on the camera, on photography, on the images that you took. I have albums that record, door to door travel experiences, and some of those add in bits and pieces like kind of flight tickets alongside early pictures of local airports. One of the albums I have has pasted in for each location the cover of a tea bag, so that the paper cover, so that they've recorded their journey through tea experiences on the continent.
Oh, what an English thing to do.
Yeah, so kind of it's those sorts of throwaway things that kind of constitute people's travel experiences. I think kind of I've got a lot of continental European albums, and that tells us a little bit about where people were going, some of the kind of the social dynamics and background. The cruise albums speak to a more elite kind of traveller in the interwar period. And then I have places that are kind of further afield, like Canada. People also voyaging around parts of the empire, both for leisure and pleasure, but also to connect with family. So that's kind of part and parcel of their tourism and travel experience.
That's really interesting. It makes me think of the French kind of impressionist or plein air movement. I think was kind of came out of rail travel and cities getting really big and people then being able to go into the country and kind of relax, and that becoming a huge thing. And I suppose beach holidays in the UK as well suddenly just kind of became a thing. Is there, I mean, I know that actually now often these places, these Victorian places, these big kind of coastal piers and promenades have kind of become less, as people have gone abroad more, they've become less popular and they're kind of withering away and often can feel a bit kind of drab and haunted almost. Do you find that there's that sense in some of these pictures that it's these weird ghostly images of people's holidays that and places that are no longer there, or I don't know, what do you find that that's the case sometimes?
I think there's certainly a nostalgia for that, but I think I've actually been surprised at the continuing trending and currency of certain destinations, places like Venice, some of the Mediterranean beaches. They have a longevity that I think we might look back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s as kind of the birth of the modern package tour, but actually people were doing this for a much longer period than we might have assumed. So I think kind of there are elements of that, but I think it's more the way that they record their holidays that has a ghostly or spectral element to it, rather than the places themselves, because many of those continue to feature in the top 10 destinations in various countries across the world. So I think it's the mode and behavior perhaps that's different.
That's really interesting. I suppose then as a kind of final question, are there any albums that just look so fun, pictures of places that look so fun that you have been like, I absolutely have to go there, that looks like the best time ever?
Well, I have to say, I have one that's from probably about 1924 that is both a cruise album but also a holiday in North America, and it is a group of kind of relatively young travelers, people in their 20s and 30s, and along their kind of cruise destinations, they visit Niagara Falls, and it looks amazing. I've never been, but it also looks kind of kitsch and cliched as well. And they're there decked out in, galoshes and Macintoshes, so completely covered up to protect them from the spray. But it looks like they're having a real blast.
Yeah.
As well. So I think it is, you can tell that from the albums that feature friends and family to a much greater degree than the ones which are, posed landscapes or bird's eye view of places. So it's having the social, having the kind of the human element in the albums, I think, are the ones which are most engaging.
Well, I suppose also it's really interesting because the places themselves, a place like Niagara Falls, it doesn't change. It's the same place, but then obviously the people, the way they dress, the photography style, and that all of that will be so drastically different. So it must be, yeah, it's quite weird to see the same thing in the background kind of not changing. That's really interesting.